The week of March 11th through the 17th is officially Sunshine Week, a moment in the year set aside for all of us to ponder the value and importance of a free press, and just as importantly, the right of ordinary citizens to hold public officials accountable. Sunshine Week began in 2005 as a way to celebrate access to public information and why that's important. And why is it important? We'd like to think the answer is obvious. Transparency in government and holding public officials accountable for their actions are among the cornerstones of our democracy. Without them, it would be too easy and tempting in the public sector for corners to be cut, insider deals arranged, and an unlevel playing field put in place. Vermont is not immune from this, although I have to say that through my experience as a journalist, the vast majority of public officials I have dealt with have been honest, well-intentioned, above-board, cooperative people who didn't have anything to hide. When mistakes were made, it was usually out of ignorance or carelessness rather than willful intent. But we're in a better place when we have codified statutes safeguarding that, and it's useful to know what you can or can't do to access information on public matters. In Vermont and in many other states, there are two primary tools in the box to ensure the best possible transparency. One channel is the Open Meetings Law. The other is the Open Records Act. You've probably heard about both of them. Let's look at each one of them individually to see what they say. The Open Meeting Law states that if a quorum of public officials is gathered together making decisions about public affairs, that generally constitutes a public meeting. Those public meetings must be warned in advance. Public meetings must be open to the public. Certain topics, including but not limited to personnel and contract discussions, may be held in executive session, meaning they are closed to the public. The public body may take a motion to enter into executive session during the public portion of a meeting, but must state the reason for doing that. Minutes must be recorded. The legislature significantly altered the law in 2014, requiring municipalities with websites to post meeting minutes online within 5 business days. So what this means is whenever you have a majority of a select board or a school board meeting someplace, that could be considered a public meeting. Even if they happen to bump into each other at the supermarket, they have to be careful not to discuss public business that is before their board. Public business really does need to be discussed only at opened, warned meetings. We turn to the very useful guide put out by Vermont's Secretary of State, Jim Kondos, to explain the Open Meetings Law. This law applies to all public boards of the state and municipalities, including committees and subcommittees. It's worth noting that this applies to boards and commissions, not to individuals. You don't have the right to park yourself in the town manager's office and watch him or her do their work all day long. You can park yourself at the school board or select board meeting and listen. The open meeting law applies whenever a quorum or a majority of the board meet. 2 members of a 5-person board may meet without the need for a public notice. On the sometimes tricky gray area of emails, members are not considered to be meeting if they are organizing or scheduling a meeting or distributing materials to be used at a meeting by email. But emails between board members are considered public documents, and if they include content that would be considered public in another format, they should be available upon request. The Vermont Supreme Court ruled on this only a few months ago in a case involving, ironically, the state's former Attorney General, William Sorrell, who balked at turning over email records requested in connection with an investigation into campaign financing. Most of us are familiar with the so-called regular meetings that are held by public boards once or twice a month on regular dates. But sometimes boards need to hold special meetings or even emergency meetings. Special meetings must require public notice at least 24 hours prior to the meeting in the local media and an announcement at the town hall and 2 other designated public places. Emergency meetings can be held if the need arises because of extreme circumstances, a weather disaster, for example, if it has to happen within less than 24 hours, as long as some public notice is given as soon as possible before the meeting. You can hold these folks to task if they play fast and loose with the timing. Special or emergency meetings aren't supposed to be used to circumvent public oversight. When can a board meet in private? 2 ways. One for a quasi-judicial hearing. This meeting does not need to be warned nor be open to the public. The second, and the more common, is the so-called executive session. This is when a board meets to discuss sensitive issues behind closed doors, where premature public disclosure could be harmful or place the public body or a person, quote, at a substantial disadvantage, unquote. A motion to go into executive session should give the reason why, contracts, personnel, for example, and no other matter is supposed to be discussed in that session. Whatever vote takes place as a result of those discussions should be when the board reconvenes in public. Boards can go into executive sessions for contracts, labor negotiations, arbitration or mediation, civil litigation, or confidential legal discussions. Boards can also discuss personnel-related issues privately. Here's an interesting reason. They can meet in executive session to discuss or consider documents that are not public documents under the Access to Public Records Act. When the board discusses or considers the accepted record or document, it may not also discuss the general subject to which the record pertains. This, then, would seem to be the perfect time to shift over to explore the Public Records Act. Usually requests for public information or records are made through what's known as a Freedom of Information request under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. Since 1967, the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, has provided the public with the right to access records from any federal agency. It is often described as the law that keeps citizens in the know about their government. Federal agencies are required to disclose any information requested under the FOIA Act unless it falls under one of the 9 exceptions which protect interests such as personal privacy, national security, and law enforcement. In Vermont, we also have a law governing access to public records. The law attempts to thread the needle between ensuring full and fair access to government documents, even when their disclosure may cause embarrassment to public officials, but also recognizing that all people, even government officials, have a right to privacy in their personal and economic pursuits. That should give the applicant for information plenty of leverage, but there are exceptions, and you can Google Vermont Public Records Law and get them all. There are about 44 of them. They include reasons like disclosure would interfere with law enforcement proceedings or betray a confidential source, account information, passwords, or the records of registered voters, date of birth, driver's license, or last 4 digits of a social security number. Does any of that sound familiar? Last year, when the present administration was alleging voter fraud in the 2016 election, this was the sort of information they were seeking to make what increasingly seems like a very dubious argument about voter fraud that seems to have quietly and properly fallen by the wayside. So yes, there are reasons why not everything should be an open book when it comes to public records. Otherwise, you have a lot of leeway. As the law states, any person may inspect or copy any public record of a public agency. They can charge you for making the copies, however, and you have to make them during regular business hours. If you're going after federal records and therefore making a FOIA request, it's simple. The form doesn't matter. It can be by email, snail mail, any written form. Before making a request, first look to see if the information you're interested in is already publicly available. You can find a lot of useful information on a range of topics on each agency's website. You can also search for information agencies have already posted online at foia.gov. If the information you want is not publicly available, you can submit a FOIA request to the agency's FOIA office. The request simply must be in writing and reasonably describe the records you seek. Frequently, it is newspapers and news organizations who find themselves making FOIA requests. Allow me to close on this note, that in this age where the reliability of information seems under frequent attack, the role of a free press has never been more urgent or important. Fake news isn't fake simply because you don't happen to agree with it, or a convenient shortcut way to blunt a criticism. Without oversight, any administration could find it all too easy to not be responsible for its actions. The role of a free press is crucial in all of this. We as citizens owe it to ourselves and to the country to cry foul when one of you have reasons to suspect one. And that's a critical piece, too. Do your research first. Check your sources. Are they reliable? Do you have probable cause to believe something is fishy? If you do, the tools are there for you to use. Sunshine Week is a very big deal and shouldn't and doesn't just last a week. It's a year-round thing. We'll give a shout out here to Vermont's Senior Senator Patrick Leahy for being a stalwart defender and advocate for it. And I'll reiterate what I said earlier. that by and large throughout Vermont and our corner of it, government officials routinely meet the appropriately high standards of their office. Not always, but compared to other places, tales of municipal corruption or scandal are the exception, not the rule here. Let's keep it that way. We urge you to get involved, go to meetings, and know your rights and the limits of those rights. Thank you for listening.